Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing another episode of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. This will be part 178. So we're going to take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So we've got a very interesting assortment of animals today, so I'm quite excited to get stuck into this one. We've got a few rodents, we've got a couple extinct animals, we got a actually quite interesting assortment. So we'll get started off with the habitat species, or the walkthrough habitat species. We've got here by Tosco or Tugo DS, we have got the lunar moth. So let's have a look at these guys. Look at how pretty they are. So this is the lunar moth, or Attactus luna, so also known as the American moon moth. So these are a species of Nearctic moth in the family Saturnidae, so Saturn like the planet, and a subfamily Saturnidae, and is commonly regarded as the giant silk moths. So that's kind of where they get their kind of names from. So in terms of description, so these guys come from eggs, of course, and these eggs can be attached in small groups that are undersides of leaves, which are mottled white and brown, slightly oval and about 1.5 millimeters in diameter. The larvae are primarily green with sparse hairs. And then instars, so most invertebrates, especially like insects and things, will go through instars. And then they kind of grow through those instars. So these guys have 5 instars, with the first instar getting about 6 to 8 millimeters, the second one 9 to 10, the third 12 to 16 millimeters, the fourth 23 to 26 millimeters, and the fourth or final instar is about 70 to 90 millimeters. So they grow from 0.24 inches to just 3.5 inches typically. So that's how the instars work. And small colourful dots, yellow or magenta, may line up on the sides of the 4th and the 5th instars, and the larvae may take a reddish-brown colour just prior to them cocooning. And 5th instar larvae descend to the ground and use silk to bind dead leaves around their cocoon. So the imagos, or the wingless, winged sexually mature individuals is what you call them, often referred to as just the adult moths. These guys emerge from the pupae with their wings small, crumpled and held close to the body, and over a period of several hours it'll enlarge and reach their full size. They've got quite a wide wingspan, so wingspan is typically 8 to 11 centimeters, or about 3.1 to 4.5 inches, with rare instances getting as high as 17 centimeters, or about 7 inches. And females and males are typically quite similar in size and appearance. As you can see, they've got these large green wings, eye spots on both fore and hind wings, and long, sometimes twisted tails extending to the back edge of the hind wing. And bodies are typically white and quite hairy. And they have vestigial mouth parts, but they do not feed. Energy comes from fat stores that were created by the caterpillar. So the caterpillar pretty much just eats, and then these guys just live to breed. The forward edge of the forewing is dark coloured and thick, tapering in thickness to the thorax of the wingtip, and the colour can change from maroon to brown. And in the eye spots, you can see is kind of one per wing. They're oval in shape on the forewing and round on the hind wing. And each eye spot has arcs of black, blue, red, yellow, green, and white, and they're thought to use these eye spots to confuse predators. So there's kind of some sex determinant and regional differences in appearance. So typically females will have large abdomens because they can contain up to between 200 and 400 eggs. Both sexes have antennae, but males' antennae tend to be much longer and wider. And wing colour in blue-green in the north, and for overwintering generation central southern states, they tend to be more green. So you can kind of tell those kind of general differences. So it was first described as Ventella pluma caudata by James Pivoter in the 1700s. So it was the first North American centaurid type of moth being reported in insect literature, and it was originally named the brilliant feathertail, but then it was later changed to Artasis Luna, which is derived from Luna, which is the Roman moon goddess, and the lunar moth. And there's also been several other species of giant silk moths given that name after Greek mythology and things like that, and Roman mythology. So in terms of distribution, they are found in North America, from east of the Great Plains United States. They can be found in Florida to Maine, in Saskatchewan, into Quebec and Nova Scotia and Canada. And they have been recorded as vagrants in Western Europe, really. So based on the climate they live, they might produce different numbers of generations per year. So in Canada, in northern regions of the US, they might have 1 generation a year, with life stages being approximately 10 days as eggs, 6 or 7 weeks of larvae, 2 to 3 weeks as pupae, and finishing as 1 week as adults, appearing in late May or early June. though in mid-Atlantic states, where it's a little bit warmer, they can have up to 2 to 3 generations per year. And in central states, they can have so the first one will appear in April, second in July, and further south, the first generation can appear in March, and second to third is 8 to 10 weeks apart. So depending on where you are, you will get more generations, but that's still quite cool. As we mentioned, they lay about 200 to 400 eggs on the underside of leaves, and each instar takes about 4 to 10 days. It depends a lot on, the temperature and things like that. They have the 5 instars as they get bigger and bigger. And then the winged individual, they've got that kind of wing. They spend the first few hours of adult life pumping hemolymph, which is the insect equivalent of blood, from the abdomen to the wings to help them go out and harden and fly around looking for mates, and we'll talk about that mating. So giant silk moths have have an in common mating process, where the females at night release volatile pheromones, and which the males detects them with their large antennae, and the males can detect these molecules for up to a distance of several miles, and then fly into the direction of the wind, coming until they reach the female. Luna moth females mate with the first male to find them, a process that typically starts after midnight and takes several hours. So researchers actually extracted the 3 chemical compounds of this pheromone gland of unmated Luna moth females, and identified 1 major and 2 major aldehyde compounds, which is designated, and it also were also synthesized. And field reports both of unmated females and synthesized compounds show that E6Z11 was it with -18 ALD was a major sex pheromone, so that kind of attracted them. And actually no other moth species were attracted to this pheromone, so that confirms that these pheromones are species specific. So you can't attract a different species with this pheromone. It only applies to male Luna moths, which is quite interesting. But yeah, quite beautiful animals, aren't they? So in terms of predators and parasites, so this species, as I mentioned, they are known for making clicking sounds when they run their mandible together, and they can be audible to humans and extended to ultrasound kind of frequencies. And we mentioned they do have lots of, they use the clicking and regurgitating to scare off predators, but also have these kind of long hind wings as well that are believed to create false targets, and it seems to work a lot on bats. Because they have you just rip it off and then they have tacked wings, and it's oh no. So yeah, that's kind of a way to kind of distract them. But also they have been known, sadly they are kind of declining a little bit. So there was a parasitoid fly, Cobspilla concatenata, I believe you say that, was native to Europe, and it was deliberately introduced into the United States to control for spongy moths. But due to its flexible life cycle, it can actually parasitize more than 150 different species of native North American butterfly. And researchers reported that the Luna moths were placed outside for a week and then collected and returned to laboratory, and they were covered in parasites, and most common being this species. So it's believed that this fly could potentially hurt populations, so that is not very good. But they do have defensive against predators and late instars. They can develop spines up to 3 centimeters in length. And like other species, they do have chemical defenses much earlier in their life stages. However, the absence of chemical defense allows for the shortening of the larval stage, which is Aptomeris has the larval stage at least twice as long as the species, which leaves it vulnerable to parasitism. So they can get parasites, as we mentioned, like this introduced one. Host plants. Typically, their host plants are quite generalized. They feed on several different plants of species of broadleaf tree. They do not reach population densities sufficient to cause damage to the trees. So they're like Tuskie's listed a white birch, American parmesan, American sweet gum, and plus several species of walnut, hickory, and sumac, all the host plants for caterpillars. Other tree species they've liked black cherry, eastern cottonwood, quaking aspen, white willow, red oak, white oak, and tulip trees. Reported very poor survival of these 7 species, but they have been identified as hosts. And they actually suggest the host plant utilization may differ regionally, so that larvae collected in one region may actually not tolerate host plants as readily consumed in another, so you can't just mix and match them. And biochemical detoxification of host defensive chemicals by the digestive system may be a factor in that. And gelome is a chemical compound to walnut and hickory, which most insects find deterrent or even toxic. But these guys have high concentration of these neutralizing enzymes in their gut, So that means they're better able to deal with that. So it's kind of adaptation to eat that plant. Because if no one else is eating it and then you can monopolize on that, that's a food source just for you. So that's a great example of evolution. But yeah, they're quite cool animals, aren't they? So in winter, they can go through diapause. So in places, as I mentioned, like northern US, they will go through diapause, and not breed, and they will not grow. But yeah, other places they can just make generations after generations after generations. But yeah, quite cool little guys. We'll have a look at them flying for a bit. I love these guys. I love the little hind wing tails that they've got there. It's really, really cool, really nice mod. I love having all these, exhibit mods to talk about, which is rather brilliant. So that was done by Tosco DS or Tuco DS. We have got next by Ricky Ice. We have got the Alpine Marmot. So another really cool little guy here. So let's have a look. Well, he's not that little, they're quite big. So this is the Alpine Marmot. So Marmot. These guys are a genus or species of large ground-dwelling squirrel from the genus of marmots. They're typically found in high numbers in mountainous areas in Central and Southern Europe, and heights between 800 to 3,200 meters, or between 2,000 and 10,000 feet. In the Alps, the Carpathians, the Tartars, and the Northern Alpines. They also were reintroduced with success in 1948 to the Pyrenees, where they had disappeared during the Pleistocene. So that's quite interesting, a little bit of Pleistocene rewilding there. So evolution. They originally originated as an animal from the cold Pleistocene steppes. They were adapted for these Ice Age climates. As such, they were excellent diggers, and even to penetrate soil that a pickaxe can't even get through. And they can spend up to 9 months per year in hibernation. Though since the disappearance of the Pleistocene mammoth steppe, it was a huge ecosystem that ranged basically from Alaska and Canada to Europe. It was the mammoth steppe. It's like pretty much I like to call it the furry Serengeti, because it was filled with animals very similar to animals from Africa. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer, all sorts of really cool ungulates, horses, bison, animals like that. But once this habitat kind of decreased during the Holocene, and also being colonized, they actually managed to persist up in these high alpine meadows, so a little bit of refugia. So it probably happened multiple times as, the mammoth steppe came back and then grew. They probably would have used these high alpine meadows as refugium, and then once the mammoth steppe came back, they would spread back down. But during the colonization of the alpine habitat, they lost most of their genetic diversity due to a bottleneck, and they could not rebuild this genetic diversity ever since, as their lifestyle adapted to the Ice Age climate slowed its rate of genetic evolution. And it's actually one of the less genetically diverse wild living species, probably for that reason, which is interesting. We'll see it pop out of there. It's based on the prairie dog, so a lot of those little holes are a bit too small. In terms of its description, they are quite a big animal. So an adult alpine marmot can reach between 43 and 73 centimeters, or about 17 to 29 inches in head to body length, and the tail measures between 13 to 20 centimeters, or 5 to 8 inches. The body mass range from 1.9 to 8 kilograms, with animals being significantly lighter in the spring, just after hibernation, than in the autumn, just before hibernation. They're also considered the heaviest squirrel species, although some other marmots have reached a similar weight, so it's kind of unclear which exactly is the largest, but it's up there with some of the larger marmots. And its coat, you can see, is a mixture of blonde, reddish, and dark grey fur, and while most of the alpine marmot's fingers have claws, its thumbs have nails. So as its name suggests, the alpine marmot is found throughout the European Alps, ranging from alpine areas from France, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Austria, and they've been introduced to areas such as the Pyrenees Mountains, the Jura, Vosges Mountains, Black Forest, the Alpine Mountains, and the Roman Carpathians, with the Tara marmot being represented as an endemic subspecies that originated during the Quaternary, and they've imitated these areas as well. They're abundant in their core population, and in the Roman Carpathians, the population estimated to be about 1,500 individuals. The alpine marmots, they prefer alpine meadows and high altitude pastures, where colonies live in deep burrows in alluvial soil and rocky areas. They've also often seen sunbathing, so often seen on a flat rock, and it's actually believed they are cooling, probably dealing with parasites, as they're quite temperature sensitive, and increasing temperature can cause habitat loss for the species as a whole, so big issue climate change. but luckily they are considered least concerned for the moment. So in terms of their diet, they eat plants such as grasses and herbs, as well as grains, insects, spiders, and worms. They do prefer young and tender plants over any other kind, and hold food in their forepaws while eating. They mainly emerge from their burrows to engage in feeding during the morning and afternoon, although they're not well suited to heat, which may result in them not feeding on very warm days. And when the weather is suitable, they'll consume large amounts of food in order to create a layer of fat in their body that allows them to survive their long periods of hibernation. So when creating a burrow, they both use their forepaws and hind feet to assist in that work, with their forepaws scraping away the soil, which is pushed out of the way by the hind feet. If there are any stones in the way, they will remove them with their teeth, provided the stones aren't too large. And marmots will remove them with their teeth. Living areas are created at the end of the burrow that are often lined with dried hay, grass, and plant stems, or any other tunnels that go nowhere are used as toilet areas. So that's where they go and do their poos and wheeze. Once burrows have been completed, they only host one family, and they're often enlarged by the next generation, so they can create some very complex burrow systems over time. Each alpine marmot will live in a group that consists of several burrows, and which has a dominant breeding pair. They're also quite defensive against intruders, and will warn them off using intimidating behavior, such as beating of the tail and chattering of the teeth, and also mark their territory with their scent. And one thing that can often be seen is standing, while they're on the lookout for predators or other dangers. And warning calls can be like a loud whistle, in which members of the colony may be seen running for cover. So the mating season for the alpine marmot occurs in the spring, right after the hibernation period comes to the close, and this gives the offspring the highest possible chance of storing enough fat to survive the winter. Alpine marmots are able to breed once they reach about 2 years old, and dominant females tend to suppress the reproduction of subordinates by being antagonistic to them while they are pregnant, or causes stress that kills the young. Once a female is pregnant, she will take bedding material, such as grass, into the burrow where she gives birth after gestation, which is about 33 days. Let's have a look at these cute little guys as we talk about the babies. Look how adorable they are. So about 33 to 34 days. Each litter will have between 1 and 7 babies, though the number is usually 3 on average. The babies are born blind and will grow fur within several days, and the weaning period will take another 40 days, and during this time the mother will leave the young in the burrow whilst he looks for food. After this, the offspring will come out of the burrow in search of food themselves. Their fur will soon become the same colour as the alpine marmots by the end of the summer, and after 2 years they reach their full size, and in captivity they have been known to live between 15 to 18 years, so actually quite long lived for a rodent. So one of their really cool adaptations to survive is hibernation, so they can survive extreme changes in weather and food storages during winter by hibernating, or shortages I mean. As summer begins to end, alpine marmots will gather old stems in their burrows to serve as bedding as their coming hibernation, which can start as early as October. They'll then seal a burrow with a combination of earth and its own feces, and once winter arrives, they'll huddle next to each other and begin hibernation, which they lower their heart rate to 5 beats per minute and breathe 1 to 3 breaths per minute. Huddling next to the nestmates allow for passive heat exchange, and larger hibernating groups have increased survivability. During hibernation, the stored fat is used slowly, usually allows them to survive the winter, and their body temperature will actually drop to almost the same area as the air around them, which although their heart and breathing rates will speed up as the environment approaches freezing point. Though some alpine marmots will starve to death due to layers of fat running out, this is most likely to happen in young individuals. So if they're big and round, they'll survive the winter. So in terms of their interactions with humans, alpine marmots were widespread, widely hunted for their food, and because their fat was thought to ease rheumatism when rubbed on their skin. And hunting for the alpine marmot does still occur for sport as well as its fat, and hunting is a danger to the species if insufficiently regulated, as they do reproduce quite slowly. And luckily they're not in chance of danger and extinction, as they are least concern, but there are some populations that may be threatened, such as the Jura mountain population, or a population in Rodina, which is in Romania, is very small and could be threatened. The use of actually trained alpine marmots by itinerants in Salvery is actually not uncommon, so they keep them in a small box while transit, and then they would dance to a playing of an instrument, so they kind of use them as a way, entertain, which is quite funny. But they are cool little guys, and Ricky Ice did a great job with these ones. I definitely love seeing a nice marmot. Nice to see some more rodent species. That's always quite good. So we'll let them run off and do their thing. We're going to be starting off next. We've got our old friend TNT and Leaf. So this is TNT's, I think, one of their last mods, sadly. They will probably come back, hopefully. But we've got a really cool extinct mod, which I'm excited to talk about. We've got a really cool animal. So this is here. This is called Suminia. So let's have a look at these guys. So that's Suminia. So Suminia, these guys are an extinct genus of basal amnodont, which lived during the late Permian, so approximately between 268 to 252 million years ago. So this is recognized as the youngest non-dicynodont amniodont. So it's kind of a last of its kind of thing. And fossil localities have been seen in the Korolnich locality in the Kurv Oblast in Russia. However, there have been a few isolated specimens all across around Eastern Europe and Russia. So this species, along with Osterna and Ulmerka, make a monophyletic group of Russian basal amniodonts called the Velociraptoidea, which are all kind of understood to be derived from an ancestor that came from Gondwana to Euramerica. And this species is Gidmoni, is the only defined species with the genus, and is known for some very interesting specializations that we'll get into. So its discovery was new material was recently actually taken from the Upper Permian and actually found the species, at least 15 specimens. The new material is mostly from mainly subadult to adult specimens that were well preserved, that suggested quite rapid burial of an extreme event, which we don't know exactly what it was. So in terms of its description, you can see it's quite a small guy. It's not huge, but it does have large orbits, large teeth in relation to its skull size, and very interesting reduced number of vertebrae, elongated limbs, and long arms and legs. As we'll get into, that's why it has. So luckily, it's actually recognized for its well-preserved skull and teeth. While the skulls are very small, they are about 58 millimeters in length. They have kind of a short snout, with the squamosal being expanded. And while the orbit is quite large, it covers about 27% of the total length. The nares is also large, it considers about 13% of the total length. So you've got like a really big boxy head, as you can kind of see that there. It looks really, really interesting. So that's kind of a really interesting trait of them. And this kind of cranial features that are only shared with Elamarca that distinguishes it as the parietal absence, which is quite interesting as well. And one of the most striking, as you can see, they have kind of a feature that's actually quite similar to dicynodonts, which is sliding jaw articulation, which was thought to have originated in dicynodonts. So this is maybe something that, it's a little bit telling it could be something basal to the group, which is quite interesting. So its postcranial anatomy is very interesting. So it has many very interesting antapomorphies for a single specimen. So they have a reduced number of vertebrae, lack of fusion in the sacral region between vertebrae, which actually suggests they would have had high flexibility. Wide pre- and post-zygomatic processes on the spine, so that suggests that they would have actually been very flexible animals. And this actually suggests that they may have actually had an arboreal lifestyle, so this is interesting. So it's kind of in contrast to, a lot of these dicynodonts, which are all very big, almost like buffalo, or even later ones like the Schwickia, elephant-like animals. These guys were more like monkeys, so they were arboreal species. So these guys, as I mentioned, had canineless, large leaf-shaped teeth, which indicates not only they were for herbivory, but into, looking into those processes, so they would have been able to shred foods rather than crush it. And their large back teeth would have been significantly larger and devoid of this patterning, so they actually would have been responsible for cutting up pieces, and they're believed to be obligatory herbivores. And teeth replacement also discovered to be infrequent of the species, as in the teeth worn down onwards to the neck. So more like mammals, how we only have one or two teeth, we have the milk teeth and then that. These guys would have only really had one set of teeth and not continuously growing teeth, which is very interesting. And a lot of the looking at the dental wear suggests these guys were definitely herbivores. And they were highly specialized for high fiber herbivory, so they were eating quite tough fibrous plants. And as you mentioned, they do show adaptations for being arboreal. So this is through convergent evolution. So a lot of their relatives didn't look like they were arboreal, but looking at arboreal animals today, like a lot of monkeys and primates and things like that. Sloths, they seem to have many traits that suggest that they would have been climbing, like grasping and clinging and hooking to things and climbing. And this is very interesting because this is considered to be the earliest known arboreal tetrapod due to its suggested grasping abilities inferred by its kind of large hands and the kind of divergent first digit, which could be used to grasping things. So they would have been quite good as that as well. And this is further supported by the flexibility of, digits, also elongated limbs and the claw shapes, which would have helped, grabbing things. They had an opposable kind of thumb, quote unquote, that one's at first digit that flexes ventrally and independent of the rest of the digits, so create like a, opposable thumb for climbing. Also, as well, in addition to the tail anatomy, with expansion of the interior region, suggests they may have actually had potentially prehensile tails, so very similar to things like modern monkeys, like capuchins, as this is based on. They would have been able to grasp things with their tail and be able to climb. So this is the first example of a tetrapod becoming to climb. So you could say all the monkeys and sloth and everything are convergently evolved with this one. And as I mentioned, they are a synapsid, so they are more closely related to capuchins and therefore us than they are to dinosaurs, which is quite interesting. And via monometric analysis, they compared to other arboreal vertebrates. They provided anatomical evidence they lived on the trees. And this is kind of the first group, to really take to the trees, which is really, really interesting. And it shows that a lot of that pre-Permian diversity of all these really weird animals, like the Gorgonopsids and the Parasaurs, and a lot of those, those are not synapsids, just anapsids, but a lot of these really interesting Permian kind of animals is really underrated, and this is really cool that we get to see one of those really interesting ones that basically evolved to become a monkey, and you have some that have got all sorts of different ecological niches, and how diverse the Permian really was, and how tragic a lot of that diversity was lost. But yeah, really, really cool. So we'll have a look at a baby one, just for the moment. Let's see what else we can find. Let's see if I can find the baby. I want to see the baby one. There's a baby one, really, really small. Really, really cute. I think that he's done a really good job. I like the uncanny valley level because it looks very familiar. It's like got a monkey shape to it. Those long legs and long tail, but it's like hairless and got like a very weird face. I think it's like a really cool uncanny valley animal. But yeah, really cool. I love TNT. Love all the extinct species they produce, and I've got to say it's a really awesome mod, and I hope they come back to give us some really awesome mods again. So yeah, definitely a big fan. So yeah, that is done by TNT and Leaf, the Suminia. People say that? Yeah, Suminia. Next up, we've got a Great Cakes mod. We all love a Great Cakes mod. We've got something from Australia, and an animal I've really wanted to see for a while, but it's not very often talked about. We've got the Rakali, or Rakali, also called the rabi, or the Australian otter, or the water rat. So these guys are a native Australian rodent, first described in 1804. The adoption of the Nalojoli named Rakali has been offered to foster a positive attitude to the environment of Australia. But we can call it the rabi or the water rat. That's kind of another good way of putting it. So one of the 4 described species in the genus Hydromus. This is the only one that its range extends beyond New Guinea. So this is actually adapted. It's basically a rat that's become an otter. It's adapted for this kind of semi-aquatic and nocturnal lifestyle, and the species lives in burrows on the banks of rivers, lakes, and estuaries, and feeds on aquatic insects, fish, crustaceans, mussels, things like that, and all those really cool guys. And they do have a few common names, and they do have actually quite a few indigenous names as well. There's the common water rat, with the golden-bellied water rat, because you can see they've got that quite golden belly to them. But also common names. There's also a lot of names that have been, the Rakali has been adopted because that's kind of the one that's more common. But there's all sorts of different names come up for them by different groups of Aborigines or First Nations peoples, which is quite interesting because they've got quite a wide range, especially throughout Australia. So yeah, we'll just stick with the Rakali at the moment. But these guys are actually the most specialized or most derived of their group. Look at how cute they are. They're really brilliant in their rodent group for aquatics. So they have, you can see, quite a flattened head, partially webbed hind feet, and have water repellent fur that offers insulation. This waterproof thick coat varies from extremely dark to blank or slate grey on their backs to white and orange underneath, where they get the name golden belly. So the thick dark tails, you can see, is also an identifying feature, and they've got that white tip to the end. This coat will change through the process of molting according to sex. So males and females will molt autumn to summer, with females additionally in spring. And molting is conditional to temperature, reproductive condition, adrenal weight, health, and social interaction. And you can see that also the hind feet are also webbed as well. They've got that ward face, that flattened head, and other distinguished features. And their body grows to a length of about 39 centimeters or 15 inches, excluding the tail. And so typically they have a body length of about 23 to 37 centimeters or 9 to 15 inches, weigh between 340 to 1,275 grams or between 12 to 45 ounces, so just over a kilogram, and have a thick tail there. Males typically are larger than the females, but the tail length is normally the same. We also mentioned they've got a lot of those features as well. They also do have streamlined with a skull that's large and flat and elongated. They have 2 molars on the upper and lower jaws, very similar to water mouse. In that regard as well. So they are well-adapted semi-aquatic and territorial species, and they may actually be quite aggressive in high-density populations where they're mostly solitary. Fighting is common, which can lead to scarred tails or being bitten due to fights, and they often exhibit ulcerated wounds, cysts, and tumours around their dorsal and posterior area. So these guys have a huge range. They're actually widespread. They can be found in permanent water systems in Australia, New Guinea, and offshore islands. They live near permanent water in a diverse range of habitats that varies from slow-moving streams, brackish inland lakes, to creeks and wetlands, even beaches and coastlines, so pretty common. Found in all states and territories, this adaptable species has resumed resettlement populations in both Australia and New Guinea. And you can see that, they've got a huge map. So New Guinea, they pretty much live in every state. They're mostly Eastern Australia, but there are populations in like Western Australia and things like that. So it is quite a varied species. So they're widely distributed from Eastern Australia, west of the Kimberley along the northern coastline, to New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. The habitat does vary quite a bit, including shallow lakes that are up to 2 meters deep, farm dams, deep water storage, slow motion rivers, things like that. The home range is typically about 1 to 4 kilometers, or about 0.6 to 2.5 miles. Waterways, and can travel between 200 meters to a kilometer a night when foraging. They prefer low banks with flat, densely vegetated water edges to stalk prey and things like that. As spending time not foraging, they typically hang out in their burrows. So these guys are primarily carnivorous, so they feed on a variety of aquatic animals, including fish, crustaceans, shellfish, small birds, eggs, mammals, frogs, and reptiles. And in winter, when resources are limited, they will also feed on plants. They are mostly nocturnal, so they search for food at dusk, guided by sight while in the water. Though hunting at the water's edge, they actually have an apparent memory of previous catches' locations. They also can be crepuscular and have been found swimming and feeding in the early morning and evening, but they do not tolerate low temperatures well, so they prefer terrestrial prey in winter over aquatic species. They also spend longer in winter periods in the warmth of their burrows. And actually, a really cool example of evolution of whale, there's a recently new addition to their diet, specifically the heart and livers of the toxic cane toad, in regions where they've kind of moved in because they were introduced to controlled crops. So these guys have actually managed to figure out how to avoid the poisonous shoulder glands of the cane toad that kills a lot of other species. And they do this by flipping them on their backs for the ease of dispatch. And then they're seemingly unaffected by the poisonous secretions of the toads that they may kind of inadvertently ingest, and actually makes them one of the few very natural defenses in the fight to contain the population of cane toads, which is exploding and spreading westward. So they actually may be a way to try and help the population, which is good. And since the early 20th century, when they were just blindly introduced to control beetles, sugarcane beetles on farms, these toads have multiplied from initial 100 animals to 100 million, and their poisonous secretions can kill a dog or cat, and have actually contributed to the decline of many different species of Australian reptiles, mammals, fish, and even birds. So getting rid of the cane toads, any way to kind of help curb the numbers of cane toads in Australia, is a good thing. Their diet makes the species also specifically susceptible to the infections of nematodes, with a larger number of species parasitizing them, which is interesting. What's cool as well, the metabolism. So they're not well adapted for hot or cold extremes and have poor insulation qualities in their fur. Aquatic mammals do not need to maintain a relatively constant body temperature to prevent or compromise their thermally hostile environment. And actually, one of the few diurnal rodents that cannot maintain their body temperature below 15 degrees, and risk hypothermia if temperatures exceed 35. The vascular system is adapted for heat loss, with no major heat conversion vascular rotilla, and this means they have poor thermoregulation and thermoinsulative capacities of wet fur as well. So they spend most of their time in their burrows, and they also expend less energy. Typically, they use less oxygen than moving in land and in the water, and they actually have the capacity to run twice their maximum swimming velocity, and their metabolic rate increases to about 12 to 40% greater when they're swimming. So they're pretty generous in that regard. In terms of their predators, humans are their greatest predator, with Rakali requiring protection by legislation in 1938. They were hunted for their soft fur and were considered a pest species, but populations have been considered to recovered in all states except for Western Australia, and they are considered a pest because of irrigation systems due to the burrowing into banks and creating leaks. And in positive sense, they've also been attributed to reduction of bank damage as they prey on freshwater crayfish. And predators of these guys include things like large fish and snakes, whether they're young in the water, but also things like bird of prey, foxes and cats, which are also introduced. And they do have the ability to kill cane toads without being poisoned, so that is quite cool as well. So in terms of their reproduction, we're going to talk about their reproduction because they are such cute little guys. Where are they? So this is the cute little babies. How adorable are they? So in terms of nesting, the breeding behaviours are influenced by seasonal conditions. So under good seasonal conditions, when solitary rat will come together to mate and will produce several litters. If young are removed, will reproduce again within 2 months, but separate the birth of their young. So limited information is available on their home range, but it suggests that they have localised movements between nesting sites and foraging areas. So Rakals will construct, Rakalis, I'll say that. Rakalis will construct burrows dug into riverbanks, but not been seen documented building nests within. Building nests within shrunken logs and reeds, in areas that have like roots or death repairing areas, and that's cover from predators. There's also increased evidence that they'll use altered nesting sites using like artificial shelters such as drainage pipes, exhaust pipes in moored boats, and rubber tires in human modified type areas, which is quite funny. So in terms of breeding and growth, they're able to reproduce from 1 year old, or once they reach about 425 grams. So mating will commence in late winter to early spring, with a gestation period of about 34 days. They have 4 mammae with nipples located on the abdominal region, and they have litters of between 4 to 5 being born in September to February that are suckled for about 4 weeks. Sexual maturity will then develop at about 12 months, but have been documented to commence at 4 months and breeding in the season of their birth sometimes. And they're able to continue breeding until they're about 3.5 years old, and they have a life expectancy of about 3 to 4 years. So not too much longer than a normal rat. They are quite territorial species, so they're mostly solitary, except for periods of breeding and mating their young, rearing their young. Their social organisation suggests that adults are intrasexually aggressive in their limited home range with overlapping sex and age classes. So captivity, only the dominant female in a hierarchy will reproduce. And fecundity is lower than those of other species as they produce only 4 or 5 litters, but fecundity is very high, which can create high population growths in a period of, good conditions, which is also influenced by the rapid growth of juveniles that can reach sexual maturity in size within their first year. So being a rat, they're not quite as fecund as normal rats, but they can recover good from, declines in population, which is good. So they have recovered a lot from their hunting, as we mentioned. So H. Chronogaster, that's the scientific name. I actually forgot to mention it. The scientific name is Hydromus chronogaster. So very interesting, name. In comparison to rattus species, so species like brown rats and black rats, they do have late maturing and long reproductive cycles. They have lower reproductive output, delayed implantation, winter estrus, longer estrus, and longer gestation cycle. And the development occurs in stages associated with the eruption of incisors, hearing and eye opening, eating solid foods, puberty, and then full reproductive maturity. So this is a species that is luckily doing not too bad. So, although nationwide the populations appear stable, there are populations that are threatened. So, near threatened populations are things like Western Australia with urbanisation, salinisation, waterway degradation, and pollution affecting the population there. In areas such as the Northern Territory, Queensland, Tasmania, New South Wales, they are least concerned. In some areas, such as the Victoria Lakes Wellington, Lake Victoria, and Lake Tara's region, numbers have declined due to commercial eel fishing, predation, loss of habitat, due to commercial developments and baiting programs that place the species at risk. But overall, they are doing not too bad and actually have recovered quite a bit, especially now that they've protected. And yeah, they're still quite a cool species and maybe something to help us in the fight against cane toads. So yeah, brilliant little guys, if I do say so myself. So yeah, that was done by Great Cakes Mod. You know, she's made a couple mods today. It's brilliant. We get to show off some more. So next up, we have got the by Monsoon, who loves making some Southeast Asian animals. We have got the hairy-footed Muntjac or black Muntjac. So this is actually not very well known. So we'll have a little talk about these guys soon enough. So that's the female. Let's talk about a male. So these are a type of deer currently found in the Zhejiang, genus in Fujian in southwestern China. They are considered to be endangered, possibly down to fewer than 5 to 10,000 individuals spread over a wide area. And reports of these guys from Burma have been resulted from considering the hairy-footed Muntjac and the Goshan Muntjac as the same species. And this suggestion, though, is controversial and is similar in size to this common Muntjac. So these guys are exceptionally difficult to study because of their shyness. Camera trap photographs have revealed the presence of where they believe not to exist for decades. For example, in the Wunelang National Nature Reserve, they're just a very cryptic species, hard to find. And this species was actually for a very long time one of the most poorly known deer species in the world and is also considered highly endangered. But up to 1975, there was only known from a few museum specimens, at least to Western scientists. The species has also been heavily hunted throughout the 20th century, and it's believed by 1978 there was at least 2,000 animals were killed. And the current population in China was assessed to be, in the early 1990s, about 10,000 individuals. However, it is likely to have declined, with the current population likely being well under 7,000 individuals. They are a species that's really hard to find and cryptic and very hard to study. So let's have a look at these cool guys. We'll actually have a look at the Wikipedia to get some better information. So you can see that's where they live there. They're endemic to China, and at one of the animals at a high level, they will cry and indicate they're not full. That's another one there. This is kind of just more general information. They are, as I mentioned, they are the same size as the common Muntjac, which is kind of one of the largest species. But yeah, really, really cool. I love nice mod by Monsoon. Really does knock it out of the park. You can see I really like the tuft that it's got going on there. I think this is one of the girls. No, this is one of the boys. This is the big boy. Looks really, really nice. You can see they've got the little canine teeth there, like muskedeer. And you can see the cute little baby there. How adorable. Very, very cute. And then you can see the girls. Hopefully that's the girl. No, that's the boy. It's the girls over here. So they've got nowhere near the big horns or antlers, you know. Yeah, really, really cool. Definitely a good fan of these guys. Nice to see another cool mod coming out. So, next up, we've got another couple Great Cakes mods. So we have got here the African Forest Buffalo done by Great Cakes. And this is 100% male, so we get a good look at that. Really excited to cover these guys again. So this is the African Forest Buffalo, or Cineris caffinanthus, also known as the Dwarf Buffalo or the Congo Buffalo. So these guys are considered a small subspecies of the African buffalo, and are related to the Cape buffalo or the Sundan buffalo and the Nile buffalo. However, they are the only subspecies that occurs in rainforests in Central Africa and Western Africa, with an annual rainfall of at least 1,500 millimeters or 59 inches. And actually has been suggested before to be its own species, and I think there could be a valid argument there. Just kind of one of them things, you know. So they are smaller than, you know, your typical Cape buffalo or African buffalo. They are a small subspecies. They get between 425 to 870 kilograms, or between 937 to 1,918 pounds, that's Cape buffalo. So African buffalo are much smaller than that. So African forest buffaloes weigh between 250 to 320 kilograms, or between 550 to 705 pounds. And weight is not the only difference. However, you can see also, if I just put like a normal buffalo in here, you'd see the main difference. So these guys are typically reddish brown hide that is darker than the facial area. The shape and size of their horn also distinguishes them. They have much smaller horns than the savanna subspecies, and they also grow and fuse together. But the African Cape ones grow and fuse together, but these guys, their horns really fuse together. As I mentioned, still quite smaller. So, while basically a big male African forest buffalo would not be very big compared to, it's still 100 kilos lighter than a small Cape buffalo, which is the largest one. Oh, that's spoilers. Now look at the girls while we get a chance. So in terms of the ecology, as I mentioned, they do live in rainforests in West and Central Africa. However, their home range can cover marshes, grassy savannas, and the wet Amazon African rainforests. So savannas are the areas where they graze, while marshes serve as wallows, and they're actually very rarely observed in the unbroken canopy in the forest. They spend most of their time in clearings, grazing on grasses and sedges, and consequently their diet is primarily made of grasses and other plants growing in clearings or savannas. So this mixture of habitat is actually quite important for this subspecies, or species, depending on who you ask. Expansion and encroachment of the rainforest or the surrounding savannas and openings are major difficulties of maintaining the ecosystem. So they will often enjoy using old logging tracks and roads where the forests are thinner and grasses can grow. In these areas, they actually depend on the grass able to develop as a result of the areas being previously clear cut. And in some areas, park managers start actually burn off the savannas on a regular basis to keep the rainforests from growing onto the savannas and changing the ecosystem in the local area. So large home ranges can be associated with less productive habitats. However, a larger area of open grassland has been observed to have a positive relationship with herd size. So if you have a large grassland with a large herd, that means there's lots of food. Though there's also the opposite. There may be a large area with a small herd. That means there's just not enough high quality food there. Home ranges also remain remarkably stable throughout the year after year. And only documentation of actual home range boundaries are pretty recent, so only time will tell how these will change. However, studies show that almost no movement from range boundaries from one year to the next. So they are pretty consistent in most regards. And I really love you got that hairy tuft on the ears. That's another way you can tell them apart. They've got those really hairy tufts. So, although the area included in the home range is relatively constant over time, the preferences in regard to what parts of their range are most used shift from the seasons. So, between March to August, the African forest buffaloes spend most of their time in the forest, while September to February, they'll spend most of their time in marshes and savannas. And they also range themselves in herds, which helps defend themselves again against predators. We'll have a look at the male because he's a really nice looking guy. He's 100% size as well, so that's the biggest he'll get. So they will live in herds to defend themselves against predators, so they're not immune. Among their predators, though, their most common is the African leopard, but generally that's only a threat to young buffaloes and will feast on them only when they have the opportunity. And another predator is the Nile crocodile, which is the only one that is able to kill an adult buffalo. So in terms of their social behavior, they have relatively small herds compared to the Cape buffalo. It's actually a common trend between forest animals and their savanna relatives. So even like African elephants and forest elephants and savanna elephants, they have larger herds. So typically, Cape buffalo will have really large herds of up to 1,000 individuals, or even over 1,000 individuals. But forest buffaloes tend to live in much smaller herds, as small as 3, but really over 30. So much smaller herds, which allows them to easier move through the rainforest. And if they are found in a large group, they spend more time grazing, since there's less time needed to devote to actually eating. So a herd of forest buffalo typically consists of one or occasionally 2 bulls, a harem of adult females, and then the young and juveniles. Unlike Cape buffalo bulls, African forest bulls will actually remain in the herd consistently year-round, but on the other hand, Cape buffalo bulls will stay in bachelor herds until the wet season, where the young bulls will join by the females, mate, and help protect the young calves and then leave. But the male of the forest buffaloes will stay year-round. So animals usually remain in the same herd for their entire lives, And herd switching in cows has been observed, however it's not common, but herds can split into two groups for a short period before merging together. So I imagine they kind of split apart, they'll hang out with other groups to prevent inbreeding. African forest buffaloes are relatively unaffected by seasonal cycles. However, in the wet season, herds are more spread out in the forest, and these animals tend to use resting places based on sand during the wet season, but use dirt and leaves during the dry season. And moreover, in open habitats such as clearings, herds can be more agitated when resting and are more rounded in shape than herds that can be in forest habitats during the wet season. So that's probably a way of defense, because being open, more exposed, have to deal with, other animals. But yeah, really, really cool, nice subspecies, or potentially species. I do think there actually is probably warrant to consider this guy its own species. But yeah, really, really cool. Nice to see some different variation in the buffaloes. Love seeing those long ears, and all the time, Great Cakes mod always knocks it out of the park. It really does. Great Cakes mod is definitely a really awesome modder. And we love a look at the cute little baby when we get a chance. Look at how cute these guys are. How adorable are they? Little fluffy guys with their little hair tufts. Bloody brilliant. Alright, so that's our second to last. Last but certainly not least, we've got a very, very interesting animal here. We've got an extinct animal. You probably saw it on the thumbnail. We've got Thylacosmilus. So Thylacosmilus is an extinct genus of saber-toothed metatherian mammal. We'll talk about why they're not quite marsupials. We'll get into that. That lived in South America during the late Miocene to Pliocene. And though you see these guys, they look very similar to the saber-toothed cats, they could not be more distantly related. That is a great example of convergent evolution, as we'll get into. So they were first described in 1926 by the Marshall Field Paleontological Expedition that looked around the Ituzaingó Formation in northern Argentina. And the three species, or the three specimens, were recognized to be a new type of marsupial related to the borohyenids, which is another group of interesting animals, and reported to the Paleontological Society of America in 1928, though without being named. Though in 1933, the American paleontologist Elmer S. Riggs, that was just a dog, preliminarily named this genus Thylacosmilus based on the specimens, and while noted a further description was being prepared and wait for a later date. He did name two species, Atrox and Lentus. So the generic name Thylacosmilus means pouch knife, and Atrox means cruel. And Riggs found them distinct enough to be a new species within the Borohyenidae, which is Thylacosmilus Smilidae, and said is actually one of the most unique flesh-eating mammals of all time. So the holotype specimen, T. atrox, was collected by Riggs and Existent, and has a skull with the teeth on the right side as well. And there's been a few different specimens typed, and as I mentioned, there's another species, Lentus, which is about the same size as the Atrox paratype. I don't know if they're actually both considered valid at the moment, but I know that Atrox would be considered valid. I think it's because it's the bigger one, the first one. And this is the species is Atrox. So more phagocytic remains have been found of Thylacosmilus, and actually then and this answers the question. In 1972, the American or Argentinian paleontologist Jorge Zetti lumped them both into the single species, and could have been, the differences between the two species could have just been due to age or sex, and then kind of lumped them into the species Atrox. So in terms of its evolution, it's very interesting. One of the several predatory mammals typically considered saber-toothed cats, but they're not actually not a felid. They're not even a placental mammal. They're a sparacidont, which is a group that is closely related to marsupials, but only superficially resembles the saber-toothed mammals due to convergent evolution. So we'll talk about what a sparacidont is. So they're an extinct order of carnivorous metatherian mammals. They're only found in South America. So they're not quite marsupials, but they are related to marsupials. They were considered to be true marsupials, but now they're considered to be like a side branch. They're sister to marsupials. And because South America was isolated through most of the Cenozoic, they kind of took the niche that a lot of, felids and hyenodonts and things like that took in other areas around the world. So they were pretty much the cats that were not cats. They kind of took that niche, and this is a great example of how different animals that are completely unrelated to each other evolved the same feature. And this is Thylacosmilus, evolving saber-toothed cat features, or saber-toothed features like, Barbophelus and Smilodon, which is great for an example. So the term saber-tooth is an ecomorph that was taken by a whole bunch of synapsids. A lot of them are not actually that closely related, but there's things like Gorgonopsians. So things like Gorgonopsians had, saber teeth. Thylacosmilus, which is more closely related to kangaroos and Smilodon. Also things like Macarodonts, so things like Mylodon itself, Barbophilids, another group of feliforms, and Nimravids, which is another group as well. But yeah, very, very interesting in terms of Borohyenidae, so it's related to things, like Paraborohyena or Borohyena itself. So in terms of its body mass, it's very hard to kind of determine exactly how big it was, since these animals had quite large heads in proportion to their bodies, which leads to overestimates, which is based on the skulls of more modern carnivores. It seems like recent things which do not access different adaptations. Recent methods tried to find a weight, and considering both extinct and modern animals, carnivores and megatherians, suggested that it was between 80 to 120 kilograms, or between 180 to 260 pounds, with one estimate actually suggesting it could have got up to 150 kilograms, or 330 pounds, so about the same size as modern jaguar, so probably about like leopard jaguar size. The difference in weight estimates could be because of individual variation, things like that, but those are the kind of things. And due to that size, it would have likely been probably the largest known carnivorous megatherian. And the weight estimates are consistent for kind of things of its ecology. So that is a pretty general estimate of what it'd be like. So you can see, the biggest thing about Thylacosmilus, you can see it's got those large canine teeth. So the roots of these canines grew, and they didn't grow the same way of animals such as Smilodon, as we'll get into. So the roots of these canines grew throughout the animal's life. They grew into an arc that up the maxilla and above the orbits. So you can see kind of that big round face, the teeth kind of go all the way down in there. So you can see that's actually where the tooth root ends, kind of up there, which is quite interesting. And in actually many aspects, Thylacosmilus' teeth are even more specialized than other saber-toothed predators. And in these functions, actually, the sabers gave rise to specialization in gentle dentition. So they had some teeth that were reduced or even lost. In Thylacosmilus, they're relatively longer and more slender, relatively triangular in cross-section, in contrast to the more oval shape in the carnivorous saber-like teeth ones, so things like Smilodon. The function of these large canines was thought to apparently be even eliminated the need for functional incisors, with carnivores like Smilodon and Barbophilus still having incisors, but these guys don't. However, from evidence from wear facets on the internal sides of these canines, they did indeed have incisors, but they have not been preserved due to fossilization. There's also evidence of reduced canine teeth, which has developed only to a pteryncus, which is actually a general trend with sparacidonts. So it might be something to, because it's getting saber teeth, it's just a trend within these sparacidonts. They also have a thin layer of enamel, and its depth is considered with the teeth. And the teeth have also have open roots, which grew constantly, which eroded abrasion marks, which are present in other saber-toothed species like Smilodon, which is interesting as well. And the convex upper portion of the maxilla is ornamented with extensive furrows and pits, which suggests they would have had lots of blood vessels and and things like that, and it could have had a horn covering, so like a keratinous structure. Potentially lots of blood vessels to feed that, or potentially lots of nerve endings. In terms of the postcranius of the species, there's not a lot known actually, but the elements so far of the examination of the characteristics... Ooh, having a bit of a play there. Brilliant. The cervical vertebrae are also, there's lots of convergent evolution within the saber-toothed felids like Smilodon and Barbophilus. They seem to have had cervical vertebrae, or the vertebrae in the neck, that are actually strongly convergent with Macarodonts, and cervical vertebrae developed as well that has actually got characteristics of other Borohyenids, so they're kind of in the middle there. The lumbar region, or the lumbar vertebrae, was short and more rigid than in things like Prothyllinus as well, and the bones of the limbs, like the humerus and femur, are very robust. There's actually probably had to deal with larger formers than in modern felids. So likely hunting large prey, very similar kind of in the way that Smilodon was doing it, in a slimmerish way. With these features, because they're the large hind limbs, the robust femur with the large trochanter, it suggested it was not a runner and probably stalked its prey. And the hind limbs also had a certain mobility on the hip, and possibility able to stand up only on its hind limbs, like Borohyena. And contrary to Barbophilids and Nimravids, which were felids, these guys didn't have retractable claws, so that's another interesting fact as well. So there's been a lot of research into what it was eating. It's very, very interesting. So recent comparative biomechanical analyses has estimated the bite force of T. atrox starting at about 38 newtons, which is much weaker than a leopard. That suggests the jaw muscles were actually quite insignificant with killing prey, and the skull was very similar to Smilodon. That was actually much more structurally sound than able to take pressures and deep bites. So they very likely may have hunted in that way, aiming for soft parts of the body like the neck and the stomach to kill their prey, and having these large, big arms and powerful necks to kind of hold that down. It's also suggested that this specialized predatory lifestyle could have had more extensive parental care than in modern marsupial predators, and could only be used by and this killing technique can only be used by adult individuals that have developed their teeth and things like that. So it's an interesting way that they would have diverged from more modern marsupials in that regard, and had a little bit more of a felid-like ecology as well, more similar to things like Smilodon. Looking at other things as well, they examined things like the cerebral cortex of the brain, which is interesting as well, and suggests these guys had quite good sense of sight and smell as well. So the auditory, the visual area, so they would have had relatively more complex brains than things like modern diprotodont mammals, and it less developed in the maxilla area than things, and the rhinal fissure is taller than things like thylacines and kangaroos. And this is the proportion between these maxilla and mandibular area, which is similar to marsupials, the consequence of extreme development of the neck and mandibular structures or musculature. So that suggests as well. So their brains were actually they were kind of like a kangaroo, or something like a kangaroo trying to be a tiger or a saber-toothed cat, or a Smilodon. So it's the best way to explain it. And their brains are very specialized, but you can kind of see that they've got some holdovers from being a little bit more marsupial, which is their closer relatives. And the comparison between things other like proteornid species and the potential prey items, and only half of that civilization compared to some of those animals as well. And other analyses suggest they also had limited stereotypic vision, with small overlap, which is about 50 to 60%, which is very low compared to modern predators, which is interesting as well. But the ossified and great bulbas suggest they would have been ambush predators in open and relatively dry environments, where sound absorption is less in more humid areas. So they would have actually required a little bit more hearing to compensate for that less just vision. And they actually also suggest it may be nocturnal. So not having great vision obviously doesn't matter if you're nocturnal, and using the hearing as well. In studies published in 2023, it suggested the unique placement and diversion of the eyes that was still granted some stereotypic vision as a result of the frontal and verticality of its eye orbits, with its adaptation being a trade-off with the unique morphology of its teeth, which never stopped growing. And the study suggests that Thylacosmilus was largely unimpeded by this reduced binocular vision created by its hypertrophied canines. So it couldn't see, it didn't have good binocular vision, but it didn't matter, it overcame it. Some other things as well, they looked at more regressions of body masses and bite force that suggest they're super low. They had the lowest actually in the analyses. They just barely surpassed by Smilodon fatalis, so it shows something in their ecology. They didn't have strong bite forces, but wide gapes was what's more important. They also looked at different cranial morphology of things like simple Eutherian and Megatherian meat-eating lineages to come up with an ecomorph. So things like Thalacaleo and Thylacosmilus were shown in values of morphospace. They were actually more similar to canids and feliforms. Even the shortening of the skull and postcranial teeth was not so drastic as in felids, despite them having a lot of other feliform, Eutherians being compared. So the study shows that Megatherians could be as diverse in cranial diversity as, Eutherians. And as Thylacosmilus actually doesn't have a significant role in its cranial evolution. So that's very interesting as well. These extinct Megatherians could have been as diverse and were as diverse in terms of their anatomy and hunting morphology as modern Eutherian mammals like carnivorans, which is quite cool. Some other cool things as well. They found several functional, in a 2020 study, they found several functional disparities in the cranial anatomy and that of other saber-toothed Eutherians that cannot be explained by it being a Megatherian, such as the lack of jaw synapses, subtriangular canines as the blade-like ones, which would render the feline-like feeding behaviors impossible, weak jaw musculature and inline teeth with no evidence of shearing activity, found it to be more akin of a bear than a cursorial predator like a cat. And actually, this very tentatively, this was a study that kind of went around. Everyone's like, huh? They actually suggest it may have been an intestine specialist that slashed open the carcasses of animals and ate the entrails, so ate the guts and only ate the guts, which is very weird. But luckily, there was a 2021 study that conversely concluded that it killed in the same manner as other saber-tooths, things like the premaxillary area and the carnassial region, and the nape of Smilodon, Homotherium, Barbophilis, and Thylacosmilus all similarly developed. So they were definitely hunting in the same way. This was kind of just a weird, offshoot study that suggested, they can only eat the soft parts, which is very weird. But most evidence is consistent. They were hunting very much like, Smilodon and other saber-toothed cats. In an isotope study, they looked at the tooth enamel of several mammals in the Papuan region from the late Miocene to the late Pleistocene. And the analyses or the isotopic studies suggest that these guys' favorite prey were grazers, mainly all sorts of really interesting notoungulates. And the diet seems to coincide with the expansion of grasslands of C4 plants in southern South America during this time. So between 11 million to 3 million years ago. So this is a very interesting studies as well. There were various studies looking to the musculature and motion of the species that suggest the muscle skulls as well. They made a rubber model of the musculature and potentially the weight. And looking at the kind of these muscles, their jaw closing was not unusual in size. The muscles, the size as well. And these masculine muscles were not involved at all in the use of these saber-toothed canines, and they had were definitely using these very similar stabbing and slashing techniques used by things like Smilodon, Homotherium, and other saber-toothed cats. So they were basically, running up to prey, pinning them down, biting the neck, and taking one nice good bite. So taking that kind of way of hunting. Also, the comparative studies indicate that the basic cranium had very large attachments for muscles there. So these guys would have actually allowed for a reduction in the adduction movement than more cursorial ungulates and carnivores like burrow hyena, but in contrast with more powerful adductor muscles. And also the lumbar vertebrae are not completely known. The last two ones suggest they had a virtual neutral pose and not an anticlinal one, so the back was able to stabilize. And very similar to Smilodon, they would have, hunted that, suggested that they had very solid spines, because they were wrestling with animals that were very large and having to pin them down to get the bite. So having that less flexibility means more strength in that regard. So in terms of its distribution and habitat, based on studies of its habitat, it's believed to have lived in savanna-like or sparsely forested habitats, avoiding more open plains. So it might have hung out in forest edges, and though it did eat a lot of C4, eating plant animals, so things like grazers. So it may have just hung out in forest edges or in clearings and hunted things. But in the more open plains, it would have suffered in competition with things like forest rakids, so the terror birds, things like Kalankin and Titanus, terror birds, those forest rakids. And also things like Argentavis. So birds were having the open plains. These guys would have lived more on the forest edges and avoiding competition there. But fossils have been found in the late Miocene of the Huracan and the Cerro formations, the Geyser formation, and Sepsin formations, and in the early Pliocene, Borromesia and Mohesono formations in Argentina. So they did live for quite a long time. And we haven't talked about extinction yet. So even though older references, they believe that Thylacosmilus may have gone extinct because of, Smilodon would have outcompeted them, things like Smilodon during the Great American Interchange. Newer studies actually suggest that was not the case, and Thylacosmilus actually may have died out during the Pliocene, so between 3.6 to 2.5 million years ago, where the saber-toothed cats did actually not reach South America until about the Middle Pleistocene, so about 800,000 to 126,000 years ago. And as a result, the last appearance of Thylacosmilus was separated from the first appearance of Smilodon by over 1.5 million years. Then again, you can argue, there's just no evidence of them, we don't have the fossils, but, it does make sense. Maybe it was unrelated, it's just habitat changes, especially with the biotic interchange and the ice ages, because the early Pliocene was still before the ice age. So potentially, with the drying out of the ice ages, which means sea levels dropped and the world became drier, there could have been less forest cover for them to live in and less habitat and outgot it, and more competition with the forest rakans and that could have driven them to extinction. Also, you could argue that maybe just Smilodon just came in earlier than we thought. Those are kind of my two logical ones, but those are kind of my two most logical extrapolations for their extinction. But yeah, really, really cool. Great cake spiders really knocked this really cool animal out the park. But you can see you got this really cool skin. We got 4 different skins. You can see this like very thylacine-like one. This one reminds me a lot of things like Tasmanian devils and quolls and things like that. Very interesting one here. And then we've got the little spotted ones here, really like a quoll. This is in the babies, which are super cute. They are marsupials, so they most likely had pouches or something like that. And had really small babies. You can see this has got the little dots on there. The adult skins are the same as well. They do have like a light pattern and a dot pattern with spots on them. But yeah, there's a lot of variety. I would actually recommend downloading this just for the patterns, because there's lots of really interesting patterns on these guys. But yeah, really, really awesome mod. I'm definitely a big fan of this one. So yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. So, thank you Tosco, thank you Ricky, thank you TNT, thank you Leaf, thank you Great Cakes, and thank you Monsoon. You've all done a wonderful job with this mod showcase, and given us some wonderful species to talk about. So yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to get the little bell icon to get notified below anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye bye.